Okay, hello, welcome everybody to this Citizens Assembly working group from Extinction Rebellion, the UK, talk about citizens' assemblies. What else? We'll be talking about why the citizens' assemblies are one of our demands, our third demand, in fact. My name is Marine and I'm from the UK Citizens Assembly Working Group, and I'm joined by some of my colleagues. First, we've got Alex.
Hi everyone, nice to be here.
And we've got Kathy.
Hi, buongiorno, bonjour. I don't know whether language, I don't know Swedish, sorry. Lovely to see you all.
And we've got Laurie as well.
Hi, great to see everybody. I'm a transplanted American. I've been in the UK for many years.
Yay! So thank you so much, all of you, for being here. We're so excited to have you, people from all over the world. So we have people joining us on Zoom for the webinar, but then there's also people on Twitter and on Facebook as well watching this, so welcome. Just to give you a few notes I'm supposed to say, so those of you watching on Twitter or Facebook, if you have questions for us, please do put them in the little comments section, and we've got some of our lovely fellow CORG members, Keith, Sarah and Alessandra, who are going to keep an eye on the questions, and we'll be able to answer your questions after the presentation. And those of you in Zoom, you can put your questions in the little chat thing at the bottom of your screen. So our presentation will run for about 30 minutes, after which you'll have plenty of time to ask us questions. Just make sure you pop your questions into the chats and in the comment boxes while our presentation is going on, so that we can collate them all and make sure we get through all your questions. Is there anything else I need to say? Oh yes, and of course thank you so much to Christian for helping us with live streaming from the UK M&M team. So this is the first time we are live streaming, so it's very exciting for us. Oh yes, please, if you're on Zoom, mute your mic and switch off your camera. This will be seen by lots of people, so otherwise people who are watching this today or in the future will be able to see right into your bedroom, and I'm sure you might not want that. So we will also be posting this webinar on YouTube, so keep an eye out on @citizensxr, and we will be posting it there. So normally we give this talk to a much smaller group, so this is slightly intimidating for us. And usually the talk is for fellow Exile rebels who basically want to give this talk to other rebels in their regions or things like that. So this is the first time we're kind of giving it in this context, but we thought as everybody's on lockdown, we might as well open it out to a wider audience. So that's where we are. So I think we can get started now with the slideshow, if that's all right. Woohoo. Ah, there we go. Oh, it's working. This is great. So we are the Citizens Assembly Working Group, and basically what that means is that we live and breathe the third demand. So everything we do is about trying to get people within XR and outside of XR to understand what citizens' assemblies are and why it is one of Extinction Rebellion's demands. Next slide. So most of you will probably already know this, but just in case you're not sure about the demands. So we have 3 demands, out of which the first one is to tell the truth by declaring a climate and ecological emergency. Now in the UK, we've had our parliament declare a climate emergency, but it was very half-hearted. There weren't even that many people there to vote on this, and the government has just ignored it. So we're not quite there yet, but we are getting more and more support for this, and we want them to act as if that truth is real. So in other words, you know, make changes today, like as soon as possible, rather than, you know, in 30 years time, which is the current target. So the second demand is to act now, and that means halt biodiversity loss and reduce greenhouse gas emissions to net zero by 2050. And then our third demand, which is what we'll be talking about today, is the beyond party politics demand, or the upgrade democracy demand, we sometimes refer to it as well, which is creating a national assembly commissioned by the government and committed to by the government as well on climate and ecological justice. Slide number 3, please. Yes, so lots of people will be thinking, well, you know, we have people representing us, you know, we vote, we have parliament, we have government. So why do we need this sort of weird citizens' assembly thing in addition to this? Why can't our government just sort this out? So yes, that is true. But here in the UK, especially, there are many problems with the current system, which have led to the crisis that we're in right now. So first of all, we elect only one person every 5 years. So even the person you voted for won't necessarily get in because it's first past the post system. So if, for example, loads of people think, oh, I'm going to vote for this person, but I might not bother because they might not get in, you get this weird sort of skewed representation. And they don't necessarily know who you are. Many of our politicians are sort of white middle class men. They don't necessarily understand the lives of ordinary citizens in this country. So the fact that we're calling it representative democracy doesn't actually quite mean that it is representative democracy. And secondly, they have the restriction of short-term decision making. So politicians need to be concerned, obviously, about being re-elected so that they keep their power. And they find it's difficult for them to be able to make plans that concern the next 10, 20, 50, or even 100 years. They work in cycles very often, and then there's always short-term and much easier problems that they can tackle that they would do before they need to deal with something huge and drastic like climate and ecological breakdown. And then another problem is that politicians rely on opinion polls, so to see what their constituents want. And these are often very knee-jerk reactions. They're not really reactions that have been through careful consideration or deliberation, or where people very often haven't had all the information you need to make an informed decision about this. So actually those opinions that politicians are basing their decisions on aren't necessarily always the right ones. We've obviously very notably had a referendum a few years ago where it was very much a knee-jerk reaction, and there was actually a lot of misleading information as well, where we're going to give all the money to the NHS, for example, and I don't think that's actually happening. So this is a massive problem. The next problem then with the current system is that individual politicians are told to hold the party line. So even if you have this really amazing individual politician in a political party who says, yes, let's go for 2025 and we'll have a citizens' assembly, if that person's party doesn't want that to happen, then they will whip them, so to speak, to just kind of shut up about it, really. So they don't have that freedom to come out with these sort of radical solutions. And then, of course, there's the limited scope for radical ideas, which I kind of touched upon already. And there is this kind of petty culture as well, where if, you know, let's say, for example, a conservative politician comes up with an amazing idea, you'll often find that other parties don't support it simply because it's a Conservative Party idea. So that's really unhelpful. And basically, these are some of the reasons why we are in the situation we're in. So next slide. So this is why, with Extinction Rebellion, we propose a citizens' assembly on climate and ecological justice, because citizens' assemblies are formed of the people who live in this country, who are going to have to live and breathe the changes that we're going to make. So they are going to think long term. They're not going to think in 5 years' time. They're going to think for the next few, decades or more, because they'll have children, they'll have loved ones that they want to have a good future. So they are thinking for themselves. It's also a way to break the political deadlock. Often politicians don't want to touch certain issues because they're worried about losing popularity and things like that. Things are just too controversial. They just can't deal with it. Whereas the Citizens' Assembly, those are the people who are there to make those decisions. They are able to talk to each other and come to a consensus together. And then what's really important as well is that this is fair and real representation of society. So these aren't, the typical politicians that have been to private schools and, don't really know anything about the average person living in the UK or in another country. But these are just people from all over the spectrum with all sorts of backgrounds, be it social or economic backgrounds, question of whether they believe in climate change or not. It will be a big mix of things. So they form a mini public. So they truly represent the people living in this country. And then what's also really important is the transparency. Everything will be recorded. People who aren't part of the Citizens' Assembly can watch the presentations by the experts. There'll be transcripts, there'll be reasoning behind the decisions. So everything is transparent, as I said. And of course, the informed discussions and deliberations are what's really key. This isn't just someone saying, oh, I vaguely know about this issue, but I don't like it. This is the opportunity where people get real experts to explain climate science, to explain social and economic issues, to really go in depth and to teach the Citizens' Assembly members about these issues, which they then deliberate together in a group under facilitated leadership. So, and then it's democracy in action. So these are kind of the advantages of having a Citizens' Assembly to get us through this crisis. I think I'll move on to the next slide, please. Yes, so just very briefly, before I run out of my allotted time, we have, so the process will start in an ideal world. What we would like to see is that the UK government commissions this idea of the Citizens' Assembly on climate and ecological justice. They would then send out a tender, and organizations who are experienced in running Citizens' Assemblies can pitch for this, and one or several of them would get hired to do the job, basically. And so that organization would then go through this random selection of citizens. So they'll send out, for example, around, I think for 100 people, you would send out around 30,000 invitations. And then you would get responses, and then you stratify the sample. And basically all that means is that they look at the percentages of people, so they make sure they have the right proportion of men, women, and binary. They make sure they have the right sample of ages, of backgrounds, color, all sorts of things. And they may even decide to stratify according to whether or not they care about climate change, for example. So once they've done that, they will select, together with a body of an advisory board, so to speak, they will select experts, stakeholders, and right holders who will then present to the Citizens' Assembly And the Citizens Assembly has the opportunity to ask them questions. If they feel like something wasn't clear, they can even ask for more experts to come in to clarify certain things, especially climate science, just really heavy, complicated stuff. So they have the opportunity to ask for more experts to come in, or if they feel like certain angles haven't, or points of view haven't been discussed, they can ask for that as well. And then often citizen assemblies also ask for submissions from the public, which will then be collated according to certain themes, and those will be read out to the assembly as well, so that people who aren't in the assembly, who aren't part of the experts, they can still submit some of their ideas. And then that's when the deliberation starts. So that is in smaller groups. So you break up into smaller groups, and each group has an actual facilitator, a trained facilitator with them, to make sure that everyone in the group is heard, that, you know, the conversation isn't dominated by one really extrovert kind of loud person, but that everyone gets to have their say. And this is really the process where the learning and the understanding comes through, because you can imagine that, you know, if there's some kind of rich businessman and he says, oh, well, you know, just do everything like this, and then someone else, you know, a single mum from a, you know, less wealthy background can say, well, that's very well for you to say, but I wouldn't be able to afford to do that, or those kinds of things. You know, it's where a farmer would meet with someone from inner city London, and, you know, they can exchange ideas that the other would never necessarily have even thought about. And that's really important, because that's where often policies fall flat, because they haven't considered everyone, and this is the opportunity where that can happen. They then draft the recommendations and they vote on them. Depending on the Citizens Assembly, there's a system on how many votes would see a recommendation passed. And then the recommendations would go to the government, where again, the government would have committed in advance to how it would implement these. So whether it would commit up front, or whether it would first go to Parliament for it to get debated, or, you know, one of those things. It kind of depends. You would have to set that out at the beginning, of course. But then these decisions get debated, and the recommendations get implemented. So that is roughly, in a very simplified way, how it works. And now it's Laurie.
No, it's
Oh no, it's Kathy, sorry.
Hi. Right, this map shows the extent of deliberative democracy processes that have taken place all over the world. They're not, though, I'd like to stress, they're not all CAs, but you can check out at participedia.net for a whole load of case studies. Some interesting ones. In Texas, one of the original gas and oil states, would you believe, is now the USA's leader in renewable energy, Texas. How come? Well, in 1996, through a deliberative poll, which used that random selection to question views on energy options, and that was followed up by presentations and deliberations, and then a further poll, the result shocked everybody. Texans were actually willing to pay extra money for renewable energy and energy conservation. So it's the deliberation and the learning that led them to, after hearing speakers and deliberating with others, they changed their minds. They made different choices. If we go to Poland, since 2016, there have been a series of CAs, citizens' assemblies, on a range of local issues. These are all local, including improving flood defences and improving air quality. They've been funded by the City Council, and very interestingly enough, it's quite empowered. The recommendations receiving 80% support from the members are automatically enacted into law, making it a whole lot more than just another consultation. Then if we go over to France, at the moment, commissioned by the French government, there's a current Citizens' Assembly, which actually has power. Its recommendations are to be actioned either by the President, a bill to Parliament, or a referendum. taking part's been an amazing, engaging experience for the participants, who are actually taking the Assembly out of its framework and shaping it by, they've called for an ecocide law. They've insisted on expanding the original question. They've invited 70% of the speakers themselves, rather than being limited by the choice of the people who organise the Assembly. They've called for an extra 3-day session, and in between they've been doing extra intense work to keep momentum going, particularly at this moment when they can't meet face to face. And we look forward to the final recommendations when they do actually meet face to face. Right, so participedia.net if you want to find out more. Could I have the next slide, please? Now we're in Ireland. The Assembly members deliberated on 5 issues over 5 years, notably abortion, which was 5 weekends over 5 months. The Citizens' Assembly itself voted 64% in favour of legalising abortion. The recommendation had to go to a referendum because in Ireland, the status of abortion was part of their constitution, so the constitution itself had to be changed. And the referendum voted 66.4% in favour, which just shows how accurately the Assembly reflected public opinion and broke the deadlock in a really controversial topic that no politician would have gone near or did go near for decades. Taking part in the Citizens' Assembly actually has a transforming effect on individuals. I'm just going to give you a couple of quotes from people who took part in the Irish Assembly. One, a 22-year-old student, said, I was afraid coming the first day. It was 98 people that I'd never met before. I walked in and met people kind of similar age, and we just all got talking and we were all kind of apprehensive about it, but we fell into it quite quickly. And then a lorry driver, a 47-year-old lorry driver, who said, but we found that some of the sessions we had, we were given legal, medical, we were given ethical, moral, religious, and then social as well. And then the advocacy groups as well. We had all of them. But I found that some of the sessions, like the legal and the medical, were head melting because there was so much information. And I'm not a lawyer and I'm not a doctor, so we didn't understand half of it. I was wondering, how am I going to process this? But the mechanism they set up with the Assembly, how it was done, the question and answer, the roundtable discussions and everything, and the presenters of the speeches that hung around and answered your question. And it wasn't the case that it was a stupid question. It didn't have to be a stupid question, or it could have been a stupid question. It was answered. But you always felt at the end of it, you understood what it was they were telling you. And the last one comes from a 56-year-old gentleman who said, so I would say we probably put a couple of 100 hours of total time into it, which is probably more than any parliamentary party committee would have put into it. So we're probably the best informed amateurs in the country on this topic at the moment. Right, I'd go off to Laurie on next slide.
XR is asking for a national citizens' assembly because only the national government has the resources, the money, and the legislative power to address the far-reaching and deep changes that are going to be required. Our major infrastructure, from healthcare, education, social and economic policy, are dependent on national tax and legal framework. And we need urgent action. And only with a national level institutions to initiate, coordinate, and oversee policy changes do we have a chance of making the changes that will be needed. Local citizens' assemblies can make local level policy, but do not have the scope to influence national energy supply, transportation networks, agricultural and food systems. And also, it's important to note that the Citizens' Assembly does not replace the government and doesn't replace Parliament. What it does, it assists Parliament by telling them what their citizens want them to do for the benefit of the broad society, not for particular special interest groups or particular party interests. And by having it on a national basis with the sortition, all the various segments and regions of society are around the table and are represented. Of course, the climate and ecological emergency cannot be solved on a national basis. It's a global issue and problem and requires a high degree of international cooperation. But nation states have agreements with each other, and it is the nations that have the power to do anything. We don't have a global government. And that's why XR is focusing its work and its demand at the national level. Next slide, please. XR will not design or run the Citizens' Assembly. This message cannot be stressed enough and unfortunately gets forgotten by rebels and miscommunicated to the public. If the recommendations of the Citizens' Assembly are to be accepted by broad public as fair, the process has to be independent and can't be controlled or predetermined by either environmentalists, government, or other special interest groups. And XR wants to ensure that the standards are upheld and is one of many social stakeholders which will ensure that the process is transparent and public and is publicized. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, XR will not define the specifics of the Citizens' Assembly. We have 20 to 30 years of global experience with different deliberation processes. There are a range of organizations and experts who are capable of designing the specifics of an acceptable assembly. Potentially, because the scope of the issues are so broad, we would expect the assembly would be several hundred people. And it's likely that possibly it would be broken up into coordinated strands with different mini assemblies looking at specific areas or sectors after they've probably had a general introduction and learning on the climate situation. It would probably require a number of months, extended weekends to get through the issues and look at various options and hearing from different stakeholders as to potential ways forward. And the Citizens' Assembly would be expected to consider monitoring and reporting requirements that they would like the government to follow as to the implementation of the recommendations and the progress on those. And many of you might have heard there is actually a UK Climate Assembly. going on right now, and Alex will explain what that is. Next slide, please.
That's right. Okay, so Climate Assembly UK. This is a citizens' assembly which was commissioned by 6 parliamentary select committees about the middle of last year, and it was initially planned to run from January to March 2020, and run over 4 weekends. Now, the first 3 weekends did take place as planned. The 4th weekend was the end of March and was understandably postponed, and the process is set to complete at some point, taking place in Birmingham. And so basically this assembly, in terms of process, is being run broadly along the lines of what we've been describing. So it's, in this case, 110 participants who are randomly selected, or were randomly selected from across the UK population, across a range of characteristics. And we're like obviously big fans of this kind of thing in Extinction Rebellion. You can probably sense a but coming up, or you've read ahead and you've seen that there was a but. Yeah, there is a big criticism we have of this, which is in terms of the framing of this assembly. So the question that's being put to the citizens at this assembly is how to reach the government target, which Marijn was talking about at the beginning, of net zero emissions by 2050. So in the UK, that's our government policy, is to get to net zero by 2050. Obviously, in Extinction Rebellion, we think this is way too late to deal with an emergency. There's a whole range of reasons that we think this is problematic. That's too much to go into right now, but this is basically our main criticism of this. And a citizens' assembly is exactly the kind of thing that you would use to address this question. So the problem here is that this is the target is being taken as read. This is the premise, the sort of starting point for the assembly. So all of the deliberations are like, how do we get to that? Rather than, wait a second, is this actually where we want to get to? And then finally, on Climate Assembly UK, no government buy-in on the recommendations, this 4th point. So what we mean by that is, as I was saying, it's been commissioned by these parliamentary select committees, and it's great that they are embracing deliberative democracy. But the select committees are limited in their power. They are not government. They are made up of MPs, but in a nutshell, the problem is that there's a really good chance that the government will do nothing more than pay lip service to these recommendations, because these select committees, they may launch inquiries, but the government can essentially ignore what comes out of it. So what we want to see is an assembly that has real teeth, as we've been saying in some of the other slides, and where you can really hold the government to account and say, have they actually implemented the recommendations? And like I said, the framing needs to be right in the first place. So it needs to be ambitious enough. So that's kind of our approach to Climate Assembly UK in a nutshell. And the next slide, please. Yeah, this is the second to last slide. We're coming to the end of the presentation, but this is just a little tidbit because there is a lot of confusion, even within Extinction Rebellion, around the difference between citizens' assemblies and people's assemblies. Now, both of these are examples of deliberative democracy, and they involve group deliberation. So obviously, citizens' assemblies we've been talking about for the last 25 minutes. A people's assembly is basically, if people are familiar with the Extinction Rebellion protests from last April or October, are these situations where people come together, so a self-selecting group, and they'll sit in small groups, and they'll address a topic which is relevant for our movement, or other movements have used it too, like Occupy. But the important thing here is that it's self-selecting, so it doesn't have that democratic mandate that a citizens' assembly has to really inform policy. They're both great processes, but they're distinct, and that's a really important thing. Unfortunately, very similar names, but that ship has sailed. So yeah, that's that in a nutshell. And then for the last slide, back to Marijn.
Hey, thanks, Alex. Yeah, so we've come to the end of our presentation. Obviously, citizens' assemblies are a really complex thing to explain in quite a short period of time. And I can see lots of questions are already coming in. So thank you for that. That's really great. We could talk about citizens' assemblies for days. We've become real citizens' assembly geeks. So feel free to ask us anything. You can also get involved by joining our working group. We'd love your help. We're really nice, as you can see. Yeah, we need help kind of explaining to more people what citizens' assemblies are. A lot of the time we have to explain what they are not as well. So that gets quite confusing. So yeah, you can see on the screen now, we've got our own little mini website, which launched today. We're on Twitter, we're on Telegram. We've got lots of videos up on YouTube, and you can always email us if you want to get in touch. We've also got the CAAN, CAAN, which is the Citizens Assembly Advocates Network. And that is something that we're trying to set up, where we're having people not just based in London, but all over the UK and maybe all over the world really one day, who help us to talk to people about citizens' assemblies and how they work, and that sort of thing. So yeah, for any of these things, please do feel free to get in touch with us. And I can see that there are lots of questions going around already. So I think we might go to our behind the scene dream team for the questions. We should have a nifty little spreadsheet somewhere. Yeah. So yeah, I guess I'll just start reading out from the top, and then hopefully we can answer your questions. Again, if we don't get round to your question, or if you leave this meeting and you think, oh, I should have asked that, then please email us. We are more than happy to answer your questions. It's usually Kathy who answers the emails, so you'll have the lovely Kathy or one of us. So yeah, we're more than happy to be talking to you. So okay, I think I'm going to start with question number 1. This is from John Burrett, who's watching on YouTube. Yay! So the question is, what happens if the citizens' assemblies don't support Exile's goals? What then? Let me just scroll a bit further. The Green Party don't exactly win landslides in UK general elections. What if they just support business as usual? This is a brilliant question. Thank you so much, John, for asking that question. Panel, who would like to answer this question? Alex, you can go first.
Yeah, so it's a really good point. I think the first thing I would say is that citizens' assemblies in the past have tended to come out with fairly progressive outputs and recommendations, and I think that that's the first thing. If you look at, for instance, the abortion question in Ireland, or there are other examples as well. The other thing I would say is that I've rarely come across someone who is really presented with a balanced view of the science on the climate emergency, and hasn't said, oh no, we need to do way more than we're doing right now. So yeah, you could say that maybe there seems to be a risk there in terms of asking a broad selection of people, but I think the risk is pretty infinitesimal, actually. That's what I would say. Can anyone add to that?
Yeah, I'd love to add to that, Alex. Yeah, I think that's completely true. And the point about, for example, a party like the Green Party, this is especially in the UK because we don't have proportional representation, is that lots of people are like, well, I'd really like to vote Green, but they're not going to win anyway, so I'll just vote for one of the two main parties. So, and that is exactly what the problem is in the political system that we have here in the UK. So yeah, and also we're all learning about citizens' assemblies as well. None of us have a deliberative democracy background, but all the experts that we've been talking to over the past 2 years, and also people who have taken part in citizens' assemblies, all say the same thing, that assembly members will follow the science and they will follow the evidence. Even the most conservative climate scientists are saying that we're in big trouble and we need to act now, or we're all going to have pretty miserable lives, putting it mildly. So any of the climate science they will be presented with, we trust enough in humanity that they will follow that science and that they will make decisions based on that evidence that they're presented with. I hope that's answered your question, John.
I've just seen another, if I can dive in, I've seen another really good question here, which I was going to maybe put to Kathy or Laurie, which is, why can't we, so sorry, this is John, oh, it's the same person. I should have mixed that up. But anyway, this is John from YouTube again. Why can't we run the citizens' assemblies? Who cares about fair? The planet is at stake. So, Laurie, do you want to take that?
Sure. I don't think there's no easy way out of where we are, and I think it's fair to say, and main scientists also say, there's no clear, fail-safe decisions, so it will come down to best informed beliefs. And I think people, and we're seeing that in this coronavirus crisis, people do care about others in their society. And when they sit around and talk to others, people that they normally wouldn't have nothing to do with or no engagement with, and hear how they're affected or how a particular option might affect them, they will act with empathy for the most part. And of course, I suppose you'll get one or two people who are maybe totally amoral, but again, they have one voice in that room. And society, we have to work together, and we have to get past party politics and polarization. We will all sink together. We need each other. And so we have to find a way to work that basically works for everybody, or 90% of the population, because the changes that are going to be required, we need everybody. I think I'll leave that. I don't know if Kathy has anything to add.
Well, I'd just like to add that it wouldn't have credibility if it was run by Exile, if it was run by a bunch of what people see as radical activists, of which we are not. We're very balanced and trying to be informed human beings, trying to work for the benefit of the planet now and the future. But that's how we would be seen. And that's why you have a totally representative assembly, that you've got all people from all walks of life with their own, and the collective intelligence works to come up with recommendations for the common good. I think that's where people do come together, and they do change their thinking when they have had deep learning and talking to other people. So you have to trust in that.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add really quickly that even if you don't care about it being fair, and you don't care about, looking after other people or anything like that, which, some people don't, and that's fine. The problem is that we don't take into account fairness. It doesn't work, because people will get upset and they won't buy into the solutions that you propose, and they will sabotage those solutions. So the prime example, of course, is the Gilets jaunes, where a petrol tax was raised, and it just didn't take into consideration fairness for those who were going to suffer under those taxes disproportionately of the richer layer of society, and they weren't having it. And the same in the Netherlands, where the government, you know, came up with the idea to get rid of greenhouse gases quite quickly, but they targeted the farmers first, and the farmers said, hang on a second, what about industry, what about aviation, why are you picking on us first? And that's because it wasn't done in collaboration in a citizens' assembly, where you would have had those farmers being able to say, hang on a second, we feel like we're, you know, being picked on here. And so even without any moral which of course is, you know, even without any of that, you have to have fairness into the equation, otherwise it just won't work. And that's it, really. Should we have the next question?
Yes, sorry. Okay, so let's take someone from who's on the Zoom call with us. Tom asks, is it considered an unnecessary distraction for local exile groups to lobby and advocate for CAs at local level? Kathy, do you want to go for that?
Well, we're lobbying, we want a national citizens' assembly, because it's at that level, and really only at that level, that effective change can be brought about. At the local, we encourage deliberative experiences with the community at the local level, but they're very costly to do it properly, so it's independent and it's well run and that people are paid. It's a very costly proposition, and councils are just too cash strapped. Probably government is now, who knows? But there are other forms of deliberative engagements that are less costly and are just as effective, engaging the local community.
Laurie?
Yeah, I mean, just adding to that, I mean, I think, you know, if you look at the science, you know, there are major issues here, which is, you know, we will have to, you know, wean ourselves off of the oil industry. That requires a national tax industrial policy changes. That can't be done at the local level. So currently, given the immediacy of our situation, I do consider it a distraction for a lot of XR effort to be focused at the local level, because they do not have the power to change our tax system, to close the huge tax holes, to stop subsidizing the oil industry. You know, improving your recycling at a local level is fine, but we can do all of that and we will not move the dial. So yeah. And just to be clear, our working group is specifically for the third demand, which is a National Citizens Assembly.
Yeah, but that's not to say that we want to discourage people. You know, it obviously there's a lot of enthusiasm around citizens' assemblies, but we would say, you know, use deliberative processes and get in touch with the Future Democracy Hub, who do a lot of stuff like people's assemblies, because you can, you know, you can stop that park from being turned into a parking lot, or you can stop that ring road from being built on the local level. So of course it's useful, but what we really need is on a national level, like radical decision making. So yeah, I mean, we kind of want both in a way, but yeah, we definitely need more support with getting this National Citizens Assembly going. So yeah.
Okay, thanks guys. There's another question here from Alan on Facebook. How are you going to deliver assemblies during lockdown? There's a couple of aspects to that question. One is, how are you going to deliver assemblies? You might want to address that bit first, and then also the lockdown bit. Sorry, Marianne, were you going to take that one?
You want to do the you bit first, and I'll do the lockdown bit.
Okay, yeah, we've probably covered this a little bit anyway, but yeah, we're not going to be delivering a citizens' assembly. Is the short answer to that. We've kind of covered that in the previous question, but yeah, this has to be a democratic process, and it can't be XR calling the shots on this. So while we're calling for one, we want to be independent of it. We might. Maybe people have been holding people's assemblies, so these internal deliberative democracy processes online. I haven't been involved in one myself, but that'd be great if that's happening. And then the second bit on the lockdown aspect, Marianne.
Yeah, so the lockdown aspect is very interesting. So we actually have a talk on Saturday. Time is still to be confirmed, but there's going to be some experts talking about digital platforms that could potentially be used to hold deliberative processes. So how that would work exactly. Yeah, we can, keep an eye out, especially on our Twitter, for the exact timing of that event. And then the week after, on the 24th, we'll have Dr. Rupert Reed and several other experts as well, talking about the challenges of deliberative processes and, citizens assembling when we can't assemble. And yeah, so thank you for that question. We don't, Kathy, do you want to add anything to that right now? Or I think I would just recommend coming to that talk, because there will be people who have loads of experience with that and who are going to explain to us exactly how that can be done. I think Kathy's frozen. Oh no, there you are, Kathy. Oh, no.
Sorry, I think I was frozen, or you're all frozen. I'm having a sort of an issue here. So I've sort of lost what you wanted me to ask.
No, did you want to say anything about how to navigate, how to do a citizen assembly during lockdown, or have we answered it?
Well, I think that's something very much that we have to explore. And as you pointed out, we are trying to find out a little bit more about it. I mean, I've always thought that there should be a marriage between the face-to-face and the digital in order to maybe extend the engagement in citizens' assemblies. But that's still to be determined.
There are a number of organizations, deliberative organizations, that are, investigating how digital could be used more, and as well as some of the limitations. I mean, it is, you have a representation issue with trying to move to an all digital platform. So it's clearly, it can be used to augment face-to-face meetings, but I believe France Citizens Assembly is using digital to continue explore in their learning phase, but they're planning to meet face-to-face to come to their recommendations and decisions.
Okay, let's move on to another question. Just flipping back here. So this is from Kathy, a different Kathy on YouTube. I think it's a different Kathy. Why do XR people never seem to criticize 5G and all the trees that are cut down, and the radiation which kills birds, etc.? So I can start on this one. Everyone, oh, sorry, I didn't know if you wanted to mind, but yeah, I think to be honest, I think that there is criticism within XR on specific things such as HS2 or other large scale projects, but when it comes down to nitty gritty policy questions, this is the whole idea of why a citizens' assembly is needed, because of this buy-in that you need, the fact that you need everyone to be on board with the massive changes that are needed. So that's why XR added this third demand, which I think is maybe slightly different than a lot of campaign and a lot of protest movements in the past, where we've not only said, right, look, there's an emergency, things need to happen now. We've also said, and here's a process. Here's a process for actually achieving that change in a way that everyone can be on board with and everyone can contribute to.
Great, and we are definitely very much against trees being cut down. So yeah, we have lots of people up in trees even during lockdown, but they are social distancing. So cool. Next question.
Sorry.
Sorry, this is a good one. The spreading the CAs. Should we take that one from YouTube? By NM from YouTube. How can we get the practices of citizens' assemblies to communities everywhere rather than just within small XR circles? How can we make it mainstream? I think that's kind of our main problem, isn't it? That's you nail on the head there, NM. So this is exactly the kind of thing that we're trying to, you know, even if I explain it to my mom, for example, she's like, well, why do you need that? We've got Parliament. And I'm like, no, Mom, it's different. And that is exactly what we are struggling with. So we're trying to get it more into the mainstream, like now being able to have this talk on all these social media platforms. We're really hoping that it's not just Extinction Rebellion people listening, that it's other people listening as well. But it's funnily enough, not everybody is that excited about citizens' assemblies, and we can't really get people to engage with it more. So that's something that we're trying to do now. So we've got, you know, all sorts of ideas. We've got animations now and talks and panels and all sorts of ways of trying to get it out into the mainstream. But really, the only way is everybody needs to just start talking about it and explaining it to their friends and families and just spreading the word. I don't know, do you guys want to add anything?
Well, I don't see any other alternative to the Citizens' Assembly unless we want an eco-fascist government, which is, you know, basically comes in and says what is going to be done. I don't believe it will succeed long term, because whoever that is will have its supporting parties, upon which it will be dependent, upon whose interests it will support. And people who, you know, aren't on that side will, you know, basically be the others. And so, I mean, I personally think the chances of a National Citizens Assembly probably aren't great, but I don't see any other process that is going to pull society together and get us out of our special interest, you know, bubbles where, you know, which haven't succeeded in the last 30 or 40 years in changing fundamental policy.
What we actually need is we need people to find out about what they are and to talk about it. I mean, I talk about it in the changing room, at the swimming pool. I talk about it to people in the bus stop. I talk about it to people I come across all the time, because it is potentially really the only way you can see of unlocking, of getting us out of the mess that we are in. It's a lot of people coming together, learning in depth, and coming up with solutions. So if you'd like to join us and you know, go and talk to anybody, groups in your area, community groups, please do. We need you.
Yeah, and join the CAAN, the Citizens Assembly Advocates Network.
Okay, let's go for another question. I think we're going to carry on with this, extend slightly. We're going to go on until 5 to 8, so another 11 minutes. Yeah, and so the next question that I just picked out. So this is from Maria on Zoom, on this Zoom call. Ireland is compact, but UK, France, and New Zealand are not. How do you, and obviously many other places that could do this process as well. How do you get people together for just a weekend if it takes hours or a day to travel there and another day to travel back home? Kathy.
If it took place for only a weekend, that is nowhere near enough time. Although Extinction Rebellion is in no way seeking to control or a citizens' assembly, there are certain standards that have to be upheld in order for it to be called a citizens' assembly. And one of it is a sort of certain period of time in which in-depth learning can take place. There have been plenty of local citizens' assemblies that have been just a few hours, 14, and it's not enough time for such a complex problem. So the other thing is that accommodation, hotels, childcare, food is paid for. Assembly members are normally paid a certain amount of money for attendance in order to enable the most people to attend. So it is a time commitment, but it's been going on in France, quite a large country, and it hasn't been a problem. They've had a lot of consistency of people attending from all over. So I think people they really take on the responsibility of trying to help solve the problems.
I just saw a nice little question here in our chat on Zoom that I quite fancied answering, which is, we heard that the French Citizens' Assembly has itself forced a broader scope of the event. I think Kathy alluded to this earlier. Could this happen in the UK? So at Climate Assembly UK, there was talk of would they be able to question the premise for the assembly, so to question that 2050 target. There's a tiny window on that last weekend, which is this outstanding weekend, which has been postponed, where the assembly participants have a session where they get to decide what to address in that session. It's pretty limited, though, to use that session to kind of call into question the premise for the whole assembly. And obviously, there's no guarantee that the participants will choose to use the session in that way. The other thing, of course, is they would then not have the chance to, or I think it would be very difficult to get speakers to come along and really speak informatively on that session at such short notice. So basically, I think not looking good at the current at this Climate Assembly UK. That means I haven't been looking at the questions.
In an ideal world, in the Citizens' Assembly on Climate and Ecological Justice that we are asking for, we would hope that that would be a possibility, that, you know, if the members find there are limitations with the framework, that they could adjust it. I mean, that should be the way. I was just wondering, could we do the question about sortition, where John Burrett on YouTube says that citizens' assemblies are not fair or representative. They are randomly selected like juries. I feel like maybe I haven't explained the sortition process properly. Sorry about that. Does anyone want to try explain it better than I did?
Sure, I'll give it a shot. Unlike juries, yes, juries are selected randomly. However, they don't, the jury pool that you get is not, hasn't been selected to be representative of the society it's representing. And sortition, that's one of the criteria, that at the end, the pool that you get in your citizens' assembly will be a mini public, or will be a mirror of the total society. So it would be male, female breakdowns as it is in the UK, rural, urban, socioeconomic classes. There are many options of different criteria, and that would be the responsibility of the organizers to come up with a criteria to ensure that this final group does actually reflect society. You know, compared to Parliament, which, you know, you look at Parliament and basically they all come from probably the top 10% of society, so are clearly not representative of the populations that they're representing. Have I explained sortition well enough for anybody else?
I think so. I think the point is that you start out with like this big bucket full of people, and then you pick it, and then you look at the proportions of how many women live in the UK, how many men, and then you make it proportionally representative to that sample. So yeah, I think you explained it. I think we have time for only 2 more questions. Should we have a bit of a agreement between us which one which questions we should do? I was going to do that there's a question here where there's so many white faces. What are plans to get diversity into the assembly process? I think would be a good one. And then maybe, are there examples where CAs have not worked, maybe? Or do you want to do other ones?
No, that's great. Are there, examples of where CAs haven't worked? I think my understanding is that this kind of reboot of deliberative democracy that we've seen in the last few decades, that it's sort of still a kind of nascent process, and that you're not going to find many assemblies where everyone's going to say that was perfect. So yeah, I mean, we talk about this, the Irish Citizens Assembly, as a great example because it's quite, you know, it's a society which is quite close to us historically, and where you can really highlight the fact that they really pushed forward on an issue which had been in deadlock for many years and had become this kind of political dynamite. So it's a really good example of that. But in other ways, people were more critical of some aspects of the process. I think it was overseen by a court judge, right? So there was one member of the assembly who wasn't randomly selected, which I think there were pros and cons to. So that was a bit of a rambling answer to that one. Marine?
Yeah, I think, but the thing with the Irish one, though, is that it had complete government backing. So there was notoriously a citizens' assembly on Brexit. Did anyone know about it? I didn't. No one did. And it's because it was a privately funded citizen assembly that they decided to do on their own. It was a great process. It was beautifully done, but no one knew about it. And the government didn't care because they didn't commission it. So I think one of the lessons that we really learned is that, you know, independently funded citizens' assemblies are very interesting and they're great experiences for people. But if you want this stuff to get implemented, it has to have some kind of backing from the government. And that is kind of the job of Extinction Rebellion as a movement, is that we have to say, look, we aren't telling you what to do. We're not going, you know, we're not the experts on what policies, but we are here to tell you, you need to speak to the citizens of this country and you need their help to come to solutions. So I think success is defined often in who is backing a citizen assembly. And so, for example, this Brexit one was sadly a massive failure.
Just briefly to add to that, I think what's also critical, even if the government commissions it, it has to be given the importance and publicity, you know, from the government that it takes it serious. So the broader population is aware that it's going on, is engaged, and the results are publicized in a fashion, in a manner that's accessible to everyone, if they're going to see and identify with it as a legitimate process. And I think Ireland, it did get the publicity. It did get the recommendations were public, and not just the recommendations, but what the basis was for the assembly to recommend, and also the voices that were not supportive. Their reasons were also publicized, so everyone had had the information and could judge for themselves how they felt. And as the results that Kathy mentioned, the assembly voted, I think, 64% for a constitutional change to allow abortion 12 weeks. And the general population, took that information and ended up voting 67%. I mean, it's not a, the other issue is it's a legitimate decision, and the 30% of the population who did not support it still accept it as a valid, decision of their country. And I think that's the importance as well. It's so they don't feel that they were neglected and weren't listened to.
Just really super quickly, Ralph Doe on YouTube. No, we're not mixing up Citizens and Climate Assembly. Climate Assembly UK is the official name of the Citizens Assembly on climate change that is currently running in the UK, although obviously it's been postponed because of coronavirus. But they've called it Climate Assembly. So yeah, sorry about the confusion. That is very confusing, I agree. Alex.
Yeah, so we do need to wrap up now, just because you did read out that other question about diversity, Marijn, just to really quickly, it's such an important issue, but just to point to a couple of answers we've given. In terms of diversity, that's kind of in the DNA of a citizens' assembly. So sortition, the sortition process or the stratification process, so this where you basically make that selection of people demographically representative of the population. Climate Assembly UK, for instance, one of the characteristics is ethnicity, so it will be representative in terms of ethnicity. Obviously, there are questions as well in terms of the speakers at the assembly representing a diverse group of people, and that is more difficult to achieve, and I think there are attempts to do that, but there's questions around that too. Okay, so sorry, I just sort of like Marijn, did you want to say something?
I just want to say many apologies to people whose questions we weren't able to answer. We've been absolutely inundated with questions, which is so wonderful. Thank you for all your questions. We really want to be able to answer them, so please email us or tweet us, and then we'd be happy to answer more questions. There will be more Citizens Assembly talks where we can answer more of your questions. So yeah, please keep an eye out on our Twitter page, and we'll let you know about that. Alex.
Yes. So can we have the final slide from the presentation, if that's possible? I'm not sure that's going to be possible, but I'll just see if that happens. But basically, yeah, thanks very much to everyone for being here on the Zoom and following us on the live stream. Here's the slide. We just wanted to do a little plug with all of our details. So there we've got the website. I actually can't see the slide anymore. We've got the website, which actually, so xrcitizensassembly.uk. Just to let Christian know, I think we're seeing your screen and going through all of the different slides. Okay, we're getting to the slide there. So xrcitizensassembly.uk is our new website, and that will also have the slides from this talk as well, which are scrolling through on the screen as I speak. You can also follow us on Twitter, so that's @citizensxr. Our Telegram channel is there too, t.me/Citizens Assemblies, and there we kind of broadcast these kinds of events, and basically what we're up to as a working group. The YouTube, you search for XR Citizen Assembly Working Group, and our email, xr-citizensassembly protonmail.com. And that's the email address you can reach us on to join our CAAN network, which I think we've mentioned about 4 times now. Yeah, okay, just remains me to say thank you so much to everyone on the Zoom and on the live stream, and to all the speakers, to everyone helping in the background, and to Christian for all your invaluable support. Yeah, and let's be in touch. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much for coming.
Bye.
Good night, good morning, good afternoon.
Along the way.